So good evening, y'all. Thanks for being here today. Welcome to the Stowe Center for Literary Activism. I'm Erika Slocum, the Director of Interpretation and Visitor Experience here at the Stowe Center. This exhibit, Revolutionary Reimagining, is the inaugural exhibit for the Gallery for Literary Activism, which we are all sitting in today. Woohoo! And it's made possible by funding from the Roberts Foundation for the Arts. Tonight is our closing conversation with David Jackson. David is a native of Springfield, Massachusetts. He was raised in a household that celebrated creativity in all forms, from music, martial arts, and visual arts. His artistic journey began early. He was mentored at the age of 9 by the artist Donald Baldwin, giving him the technical foundation to exhibit his work across the Northeast. David obviously is currently serving as the inaugural artist here at the Stowe Center. His work has been celebrated in venues ranging from the New Britain Museum for American Art to the Hillstead Museum here in Connecticut. His pieces are held in private collections of notable figures such as Dr. Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson, and a variety of professional athletes and executives. Please help me and join me in welcoming David.
Thank you so much for such an illustrious introduction, Erika. I appreciate it. So I'm so glad that you're the one up here that I can have this chat with. And I'm glad that you opened up saying that you're not a serious human being, because neither am I.
We'll be silly together.
Yep, the goal is to have a good time tonight, right? First, can y'all hear me back there? Cool, so I don't need to use the mic or anything. Awesome, awesome. Sometimes my voice can trailer, so if that happens, but I'll depend on you to say, hey, speak up there, and then I'll go ahead and project my voice. But it's an honor to be here, especially in this space, right? It's a privilege to be the first artist in this new environment, right? I often say that you shape the space, and in the space shapes you, right? And so I think that with the help of Erika and the other staff that's here at the Stowe Center, we really manicured and fine-tuned like some really good pieces to place together. She may have denied me on a few other pieces, and we'll get into it probably as the night goes along on what we were thinking about for our vision for in here. But we think that it tells a great story that hopefully it resonates with you all, and we're going to dive into some of those details today.
Okay, thank you, David. So we're going to start tonight with a conversation, as David said, between him and I, then we'll give space for folks both on Zoom and in this space with us today to ask questions and to really join into the conversation. I just want to let folks know, if as you were coming in, there's a QR code on the screen. A few of his pieces, Perpetual Fire, so this one and this Harriet's Inconvenient Truths are for auction tonight. Not these two, but the prints, the prints that are in the bookstore. For those who are on Zoom, the link is in the chat. And so if you would like to take part in the auction, you can just click on the link, which will take you to David's site where you can bid. All right, so I'm going to get into the questions. So I think for me, when I look at your art, right, so you talked briefly about the pieces that you had and the way we were kind of thinking about setting up the space. And I think for me, when you brought the art, when you set pictures, I was seeing this evolution of your art, this evolution of your thought process, or what have you. But when we were grappling with this idea of what would this exhibit be called, and what was the concept, I just wonder, because I wasn't really fully in the room the whole time, right? But how did you come up with the concept and choose, with some help, the pieces that you wanted to come into the space and be a part of this revolutionary reimagining?
Great question, right? And you can take credit for it, right? So I can throw a lot, and sometimes I get overly ambitious, right? So just like when I get to be a glutton, not only for food sometimes, but also for like the visual arts, right? I think Angie may have coined it at one time we were talking, like, there's certain like visual noise, right? So my pictures, I love to amplify details, right? And to have different layers of literal moments, right? And so things that tell a story that you can kind of carve through. I'm a huge proponent and believer of double, triple, quadruple entendres, right? That's why I love hip hop so much. Of course, I love to talk, right? In these type of settings or in interpersonal settings or so, right? But I'm more of a listener, right? So when I'm, just throwing spaghetti at the wall and we're talking, we're bouncing off each other, you're like, all right, brother, like, all right, cool, I hear what you're saying, but let's chop it down here. Let me help steer you in this direction. And I really benefited from that, right? And it was such a collegial and really powerful collaborative that we had, going over there and sitting in your office and really breaking down the pieces that will, tell the story. So I have about 600 or so pieces in my portfolio, right? I'd say about 150 to 200 loosely are these what I call iconographies, right? So in narrowing those down, it can be tough.
Right.
And so it was cool because it just so happened organically and again, the credit to you, as I would want something on one wall, you said, no, and then you got after me about like, you said, come on, you said your pictures, so you got pictures of the area? I said, yeah, I do, here you go. I said, yeah, bro, these are trash. They're not gonna, I need something else. Let me go and let me measure these out. And then you accurately depicted where things should go. And I said, I'm thinking about this over here, this, and you said, no, let's flip it over this way. I said, are you sure that's gonna fit? This, the spatial cues tell me this, and said, trust me. And so it's interesting because as you go around, it's almost in chronological order on my evolution as an artist, right? So starting with MLK, that probably dates back to me, and don't quote me on it. Anna Rose, you could hold me. It's 2007, right? Cool. So let me guess first. I was gonna take a shot at it. Right? And then you come around here and you can see it, right? As I start to add in like more of, so I started to do more from an objective point of view as an artist, which brings me back to a child, right? Is can you see what I'm seeing? Am I depicting something accurately? Right. And then as you go around, that red series back there is tapping into sheer emotion. Like how can I evoke emotion? What's a powerful color, right? Red. It evokes so much. And then you start to really dive into like the narrative and the stories, right? My own personal connections and feelings and my narrative and my voice coming out as you come around here. So that's how we went to like, on those pieces.
And I'll say too, for me, it was not knowing, just for y'all here, and I think Dave and I have had the conversation, but like not knowing when the pieces were made or the kind of story that he was trying to tell, the history he was trying to bring out, but thinking about like, for those who aren't here in the space, it's a little bit harder to like envision if you haven't been here. But that like, he had like MOK and Maya Angelou over here and Erykah Badu over there. And it's like, but these are the literal leaders, like the top voices of particular moments and movements that, like you said, is very literal, right? And so when we talk about and think about literary activism, I don't know, I think that's one of my questions, but we'll just do the thing. But when we think about literary activism, it's like there's the literal part, like here are the people who are saying the words, who are writing the words, who are doing the thing, educating communities. And then there's the literary activism through art that is telling its own kind of like, subjective story instead of being objective, right? Yeah. And so what I'll say for me, like this idea of literary activism is, is the writing down, is the saying of words, is the telling the stories. But as an artist, it's also the art, right? And the way that the art speaks. to folks and oftentimes for folks, right? Like giving folks an opportunity to find a voice, at a time when they might not have one. So I'm not gonna ask this question just yet, the next question just yet, because I wanna ask you about the words, right? And so like, at what point, again, thinking about the evolution, having seen the catalog, right, and understanding that your portfolio is vast, that like, you started to put in a lot of actual words.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that and why that matters?
Yeah, great question. So it's actually really transparent and it's through and through on my process as an artist, right? So as much as I do love to draw, and that's what you see on that wall over there, and even like Nelson Mandela, like those are colored pencils. So there's copious layers. So for like the skin pigmentation, you're talking about probably like between 14 to 17 different colors that combine, right, and like meld together. So a lot of the times when people see it, they're like, oh, nice oil painting. I'm like, no, it's actually colored pencil. Like, really? And it just came through experimentation. But because of the tediousness of working with like colored pencil or like very solvent like watercolors, right? You got to be careful about how you're going about and be very diligent, right? And so I kind of wanted to escape that in a way. And so that's also what you see here. You also see my laziness as you come around, right? So as I start to go into the oil and the acrylic paint, so when it comes to like Erykah Badu and Donny Hathaway, I just started to plot things out because I wanted to cut to the chase, and I wanted to get to the colors, right? I can't wait to express the colors in the image. And so my process starts off with just simple circles, like a snowman. That's why it cracks me up when I'm teaching art and folks are like, I can't draw a stick figure. I'm like, actually, that's where it starts. Right. And actually, that's where it ends for me, just for the skeleton. But for any students or anybody that are doing that, you need a strong structure and you need know the rules before you break them, right? Right. And so then I was able to map them out. But I would say, okay, eye here, face here, to the point where you're coming over to like Jimmy Baldwin, back to the drawing board, and mind over matter. All I did was just plot things out in words, right? So I would put, protagonists. And so that's where like Tupac would be at. And I would just cover that area. And I'd say, train here, train there, train 1, train 2, train 3, old fashioned. But then I would go in with different layers and build on top. And that's how like my process would do. And so then I wanted to revisit the layers. Mind you, while I'm processing this, I'm immersed in these subject matters. So I'm listening to Michael Eric Dyson and his words, right? I'm surrounded and entrenched with, like, when I did James Baldwin, right? So put me on to the discussion with Nikki Giovanni, right? So there's these connections. And I think that's what's really special about the exhibit is the organic connections that bounce. And sometimes I don't know what I'm doing, right? So to have MLK done in 2007, but then he was friends with him and he talks about, losing Martin and Malcolm and having these discussions, right? And him alluding to like, I could have been Medgar Evers, I could have been, and so he's listing all these things. I'm like, holy mackerel. Oh, it all makes sense now and it all connects. And so I have those written now. So I have like MLK in graffiti in this, because I'm always paying homage to a certain degree to hip hop. So it's in here, it's on the train, in Mind Over Matter. And so they all come together. So I can't escape the verbiage because essentially that's my way of rhyming, right? Right. And that's what I wanted to incorporate visually in these paintings.
Okay. So for folks who are not in the space and want to see the art, it is on David's website, and so there's a link. If you go click on the link for the auction, it takes you to his website, so you can see actually the art that we're talking about there on the page, as well as a couple of videos. So for everyone who's here, the QR codes that are in the space. On the labels for each piece of art will actually take you to a playlist that David curated, which is a playlist of speeches and songs that kind of helped influence him as he was working on the art and continue to influence him in his work. So again, that's either classicjacksonarts.com.
Yep, classicjacksonarts.com. It's plural.
Okay, art. Sorry. Plural, multiplicity. .com. Yeah, so the next question I have for you is, I think you talked a little bit about this, but this is a two-parter, right? And so it's like, how do you choose the figures you want to paint, and why did you include them in this specific exhibit?
Yeah, so remember originally you was like, hey, where's Billy? I need Billie Holiday in here. Oh, I said, Billy's over laughing. It said you kind of helped out.
So I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna rewind, right? So process. I said to David, I want to do the thing, right? So David and I met. David's from Springfield. I'm from Springfield. He actually did a piece of art for my cousin who had passed away, and I had never met him until he came here to paint this painting for us at the Stowe Center. But, you know, when he came, I said, I know you, and I don't know why I know you, but I know you. And at that time, this space was under construction. And so we're going back and forth. Is this space going to be like a gallery? Is it going to be, kind of like a curated space where we talk about words and books, right, that aren't for sale, but, you know, kind of creating a space where we're talking about why words matter, right? And when I finally got the okay that this could be a gallery, I was like, David, I want your art in this space, right? And so he said, well, go on the website and tell me which pieces of art you might want in the space, right? And so I was like, okay, so this one and that one and this one and that one. And I made a whole list. And I feel like the longer we kind of went out, as far as like, you know, this guy's like famous, you know, so he's got art all over Connecticut at this point. And so a lot of the pieces that I was like, Billy was one, Erika was another one that I was like, they have to be in the space. He was like, oh yeah, that one's gone. That one's, you know, hanging at the Windsor.
Erika's at my auntie's house. I had to go top. And you know, my aunt Renetta, she had like this handwritten. So when I went to go take it off the wall, I get home and so I'm glad she ain't in the audience right now, but she's I'm here. So there's a note that's written on there. She had me sign a contract that says, this is mine. Make sure that you bring it back or so. And I said, no, it's on loan, right? So, you know, so I went through lane. I almost had PTSD and flashbacks to my auntie reprimanding me. So I went through a lot. That was the worst.
So again, I know, so that's a little bit about like why some of the pieces that I wanted, but I know that there were a number of pieces, like the red series is what I call it. I don't think that's what you call it, but like there were pieces that you were like, I don't have that, but I'm going to bring these with me. So can you talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, and it just kind of worked out, right? All the way down to the walls, right? And the color, where, you know, when it came to Cindy, who works here, said, trust me. It's like, great. Not knowing, so this is my favorite color.
Oh, nice.
Period.
Okay.
Period. Like, I love gray. I have so much color and stuff in my imagery, but gray is actually my favorite color because, you know, it when you talk about value, it's what captures the rawness, right? So you have the color, but then what's layered on top of that is the grayscale that sits on top of it. So I always have that peeking through, right? And that's how I mix my color, and that's how I come up with my palettes. As you'll see, the constant theme in all works is pretty much light, right? There's always, even if it's muted to a degree, there's still a glimmer of light that's in there, and that symbolizes hope. And so I think that was important for the space as well. It just comes naturally with my collection, but I also wanted to emphasize that, right? Because I think was powerful that you had plugged me to. And during, I think it was during the Christmas party last year, and our ED
when I was like, this is
Yeah,
happening.
and Karen had mentioned like, oh, Erykah came up with the concept, talked about the constellation of Black voices, right? And I said, woo! I said, that's fire. I said, constellation of Black voices, and talking about those that like do the work and inspire, like, right, like Harry Beecher Stowe, right? And so that's what came to mind is like, who can I have? I like to pay homage to those hidden figures or to the obscure. So largely you have people that, might be familiar, but then you're like, well, why is Erykah Badu up here? It's like, well, because when you're talking about neo soul and you talk about rawness and like, conveying their vision and stuff, it can tap into contemporary times. And you talk about like somebody who has the lyrical prowess, right? And so she conveys that. Donny Hathaway conveys that, right? And not many people know about Donny. You also have the tragedy in his life, right? And how he went out, but still peering and like looking over, and then the flow of the gallery and the way that people are looking, right? It all came together that way, where those that were omitted, it allowed others to kind of step up off the bench, so to say, but then to bounce off of the walls, it made perfect sense when it was all said and done. So it was really good.
So I know we talked a little bit about who got left out, right? Because Billy's not here.
Yeah,
I'm so sad about that. But is there anyone else that that you thought of and thought of for the space that didn't make it to the space?
Yeah. I think you denied it. So So I have a few like Jay-Z pieces, right? And so when we talk about lyrical folks, so I have like a few whole pieces, and one of which is like Frank Sinatra and him, right? It's like because Frank Sinatra, like My Way, right? And Jay-Z plays off of that with one of his songs, right? And, Oh Blue Eyes, I Did It My Way, right? And so and how Frank kicked open the door, right? And had the Rat Pack, and he was doing his own thing, right? And enterprising that way. And so, and I was like, oh, the grayscale, you got the blues in there and the hues. I said, this would be perfect. I'm like, yeah, nah, we do that. I also have some other like Nas ones, right? And so when you talk about those, but I think we have a nice balance when you talk about running the gamut from those that are known, and we know like a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to like a Maya Angelou, to Nelson Mandela, and then it plays off of like a James Baldwin happened to, and so the centennial really kicked it off, right? Because you're like, hey, what's around the corner is this, and I said, I've been holding on to a Jimmy Baldwin reference picture for like 10 years, over a decade or so. I said, well, I can't wait to put this to work. Oh, you got me juice. And I rarely ever take other people's suggestions. But I said, yeah, no, she's on to something. She's putting it together. I said, yeah, this is going to be one of the catalysts to it. And so as long as Jimmy was in the space, and then as I was working, I knew that it would come together. And so I was super thrilled that you're like, hey, that the one where Tupac's the protagonist, I want that one there for train of thought. And I said, oh, that's great. Mind you, I've got certain parts blocked out because there's some cusses in there. So I had to censor it to a certain degree because I knew that kids be coming through here and stuff. So it's plastered up there, right? But it's not too bad. So whenever you see like those black fragments in there, it's because there's some colorful language that.
So what I will say about that though is that that's one of the pieces, like, so one of the things that we do here at the Stowe Center is we have student groups come, for tours throughout the school year. And I will say that, this went up at the end of the last school year, so April. And we had groups come in, and that's one of the pieces that students like gravitate towards. And I know that you were saying before, oh, it's because there's a piece of jewelry and it shines and it's attractive. But I think the thing that it has resonated so much with students is like this idea of like thought process. Like there are kids who come in that are like, middle school, high school, and I'm just like, what do you know about Tupac? And like, they know about Tupac, you know what I mean? And so I think that like, for all the pieces, you know, that is one of my favorites, that one, and, Erykah, because I love Erykah, and Baldwin. But I think that that when I seen that, I was like, I want that all, in large part because of like who Tupac is, right? As far as like who he is, you know, to, you know, West Side culture and, you know, his lyricism and, but also just like, you know, the way that he talks, like he was an orator, right? And he talked about
revolutionary.
So when you think about revolutionary,
To the point, and not to cut your wisdom,
no.
but to the point where, right, again, the things that came through naturally. So you look at, and I think that's part of the curated experience when you scan the QR codes, is Nikki Giovanni explaining how one of her tattoos is thug life, right? And so you would never think that that's what she has tatted on her body, but she does because of her reverence for not only Afeni, right, Tupac's mother, but for him himself and what he stood for. So you have this complexity, right? And I think that's the other main thing that I love about these individuals in the room is that they're complete human beings.
Right.
And that's what I really wanted to portray. And that's what the literacy and the lyrics are enabled to do, is to not just look at the manicured aspects and like the black and white. That's why I love like the MLK piece. He has the fingers like intertwined. You see him like a little bit more docile, like calm, but you see him contemplating, coming together, right? He's thinking, it's contemplative, right? And it's all of that because that's who we are as people. No matter what our backgrounds are, we are living, breathing, desirable human beings that have hopes, wishes, desires, that when it comes out, like we have needs too. How do we go about going about that? How do we articulate that? How do we express that? And you have these connections that play off of each other, right? So that was a rooted one. Same thing with, you know, that whole wall with that Red series and the Power series. It's like, how are they able to, from an orator standpoint, articulate themselves and have this level of conviction with these powerful words? So they don't even have anything on there like these others do, but it's their energy and their intentionality that they have, and there's not a word that's missed when they go to speak. And that's the same thing that I wanted to present in visually when it comes to these pictures.
So to my next question, perfect segue, is what does art do from a practical standpoint, and how does it really bring about change?
Yeah, so, you know, great segue. You know what you're doing.
I do.
Yeah. So when it comes to my intentionality of the imagery, right? You know, in order for there to be the power of the civil rights movement, it's funny because it's twofold. You have somebody like James Baldwin, who, when he would amass certain levels of wealth, he would branch out, right? But he was a twofold soldier, right? So just like Pac, he's one that's not only funding certain movements, right? And is in the background, but he's also standing out there and saying, oh no, I gotta come from Paris. I gotta leave Paris. I gotta come home, right? When he saw what's happening with Dorothy, right? Said, hey, I've gotta come home, right? I've gotta come home, I gotta touch down, and I gotta see what's going on, right? I gotta touch the people. You got somebody like Harry Belafonte, right? So you think about the Deo gentleman, right? You know, God bless and rest his soul. He was a purveyor and one who funded the civil rights movement. So when it comes to art, it could be a cash cow, right? It could not only fuel from a financial standpoint, what it is that you believe in, and then from almost a collector's or a souvenir standpoint, you walk into somebody's house, right, or somebody's environment, you're like, oh, okay, I know what you stand for.
Mhm.
Right, you know, I can feel that energy, and they carry an energy with them, right? And within that energy, there's a level of responsibility and accountability, right? And so that, from a practical sense, is what the arts can do, and why it's so glorious. I feel so privileged as a vessel that I can contribute in that vein. And so that's what really stands out to me there. And there's a lot of people, James Brown, same thing, right? Somebody who, between the Hitmans, he's also paving the way for Black culture, right? And not any sort of like tampered or watered down way. You're getting who he is, doing the splits and all that, right? So it's the entertainment standpoint, but then it's also what he's standing for as well. Right. And then, of course, you got somebody like Nelson Mandela. That's why I love that he's an island unto himself. Right. Because to spend 26, 27 years, do what he did, like that's the ultimate sacrifice. And to what he was able to come out to, right, is the epitome of, writing, standing down, but standing tall, and what you believe in, and what you're coming out to pave the way for.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna ask this question. What was the most relevant work, and which is the most urgent, and which was the most labor intensive?
Yeah.
Of the pieces that are
It's
here.
funny because despite train of thought being the largest in here, it's probably tied between being the most labor intensive. It wasn't the most urgent. I think that maybe back to the drawing board was probably the most urgent in a way. I would say it's tied between back to the drawing board and actually Harry's Inconvenient Truths. So the process this, and shout out to Kamora Harrington, right? Being rooted in community, right? And I think that's what also was so special, is like the connection. And this being commissioned for here and being a part of this communal atmosphere where I was called with Kamora, who will facilitate and lead, cultural humility functions, and talking about somatic abolitionism, right? Which is, labeled here on the Kit Kat bars for Kit Kat conversations, right? For like breaking conversations, right? And said, hey, we're going to be facilitating this, it was 3-4 part series workshop. So I would come and I would paint live, right? But people know my process. I'm slow. My mama can attest to that. She's in the back, said, boy, it was way too slow. Been an old man since he was about 2 years old. I wear that proudly, right? Just methodical, right? And so that's my process. I work slow, usually. Yeah. No, don't play it. So, but when it comes to the sense of urgency, I felt a certain level of pressure, but pressure's good. It could bust pipes, or it can make diamonds.
Right.
Also alluded to the train of thought picture down there too, right? Also in here as well. So I would be writing, it's the first time so I take copious notes in my phone. So I have about 1,000 notes in my phone. Right. And so when it goes into the literal play, I take a note of everything, conversations. But in here, I went overboard when I was taking notes and painting at the same time during those workshops, to the point where I didn't know that my iPhone had a note limit. And so it told me, it was like, yeah, you're out. You got to go on to another page. Stop it, brother. And so I would fuse all those. And there was a sense of, okay, how are we putting it together? I got to make sure that I show folks something that I'm working with, so that they don't think that I'm just messing around with colors and I'm just having a blast. I mean, I'm having a blast, but there's a certain process that I have to go through between bouncing between the verbiage to really be succinct with what people are saying, and then to synthesize those so that you get these here. Again, alluding to what Angie talked about with visual noise. So to comb through 2 pages of notes essentially, and then to taper down, right? Like I'm long-winded, as you can tell. To taper down is tough for me, because I don't want to leave any stone unturned. And so because if I do that, then I'm leaving a piece, a fragment of that person or that character, you know, that I want to make sure that, you know, I capture in there. Yeah, so I would say that those are tied there. And then Jimmy, right? Jimmy was super labor intensive. And him, I'll be vulnerable, I'm no artist, so I cried during that. So my family was away, I had my mom, my little guy he was like in other rooms, and I'd be sitting there and I was working on the bottom part here, and I was immersed in the discussion. It was the discussion with Nikki Giovanni's baby, you know, but why do you think that? And you could see this wrestling and this tug of war between the generations and them having that conversation on like, why don't you see it this way? He said, you know what? Because when I come home, I need you to lie to me.
Right.
I need you to lie to me. You go out and you give, and so some of the guilt was actually going through my head, right? My wife gets after me sometimes. You got another event, you got this going on again, you got this stuff. I told you to protect me and sit here. So you know, I would feel a certain sense of that pressure. So to say, hey, you know, you're giving out to like the community in certain ways though, but you also got to take care of home. Charity starts at home, right? So you got to keep that in mind as well. And it's that constant balance and like give and take. But I felt so blessed that I was able to capture something that I've been holding on to for years. And then it started piling. I said, "Ooh, I ain't done yet. I got some things to do with this." And so then it just flowed, and it kind of just it spewed out of me. And it was one of probably like my most fun pieces to date, for sure.
So folks want to know more about his process. David actually has a video on his website, classicjacksonarts.com, that explains the process and kind of goes through bit by bit, piece by piece, like what is the what is the word? What is the word? Just yeah, like the layers of the art, you know, what each piece of the imagery means. For that one, for Perpetual Fire and for Harriet's Inconvenient Truth. So both of those are on his YouTube page and on his website. I want to give space for folks who are here, for folks who are at home. If there are any questions that folks want to ask David, either about his process, about, I don't know, I don't want to open you up and be like, tell me more. You know, if folks have questions for David and want to take time to ask them now, we'll be here until 7:30, but yeah, Karen.
Well, just that, first of all, we got to know each other through this work, but what I'm finding through the rest of your work is that in the film business, we call them Easter eggs.
Yes.
With little nuggets of truth. And I find that true in literature. There, you get so much from something not small because it's epically big, but how does that, when do you decide which, it's like the curating of this exhibit, how do you decide which things to include and which to leave out?
You would ask that question, Karen. So real quick plug. So Karen, director, producer of Price of the Ticket, you and Doug, right? So it's an honor to have you here, just like it's an honor to have everybody here. But especially, so when Karen and I met, right, over at the White Privilege Conference, and you know, I knew who she was, and it was great to finally meet her, because while I was creating this, I went through everything that's either on YouTube. I was reading, let me see, at the time, Go Tell It on the Mountain. I was wrapping that up, and I just got finished reading The Fire Next Time. Yeah. And so I had a lot of moments with James Baldwin, to the point where I was super vulnerable. After I finished reading The Fire Next Time, right, I just had the punchlines, right? Again, I'm a hip hop head. So the punchline at the end of there, you know, there was water, right? And so he's alluding to the flood, right? And to Noah's Ark. When we talk about biblical times, there'll be fire next time. I said, ooh, that's cold. I said, that's one of the coldest lines that I just brought that book to my bosom. I said, oh my goodness. I said, Jimmy is speaking to me. So when it comes to the Easter eggs, right, that's something that, because of Jimmy's his background and his orientation and preference, right, I didn't want to be overt when it came to his sexual preference or anything, right? But after reading that, I said, well, I can't avoid, like, so it's that double entendre, right? So the rainbow, right, that comes, right, that he talks about in that last line, I really wanted to portray there. And then of course it's a nod to who he is and who he didn't overtly necessarily come out and say so, for because he had so many layers and so much to offer to the world, right? But I'll never forget when you first stumbled upon that piece and you go, so you start coming to the corner, you go, ooh, why would I want to be integrated in a burning house? I said, oh, how in the hell do you know that? I said, she goes, come on. You know, come on now. You know, because I studied, I said, come on. It jumps out to me. And the house is flipped upside down. You know, the bells that's there. You have the concrete and the cement and the sidewalk that's breaking up, but then also leading to the mountains, right? So sometimes things just come naturally in the foreground, right? And I wanted this duality and this dichotomy between Jimmy's, like, looking at the Southern like culture and kind of like in Black culture, how you can feel that all the way through like Harlem. And that's why there's like the church that's sitting on the clouds because of how he came up, but the clouds also form into cotton balls, right? And then I happened to stumble upon one of my favorite creatives, who creates denim tears, right? And so you're talking about like the cotton wreaths, right? And so I wanted to pay homage there, and I said, well, what would Jimmy wear if he was in like a denim tear outfit? So you have the cotton flowers on one side, right? So the beauty in there, and then you have the blood and the X that's there saying no more, right? No more of this labor, and it's being crossed out over his shoulder, but it's also a trail leading to greener pastures up there in the church. But then you have the flower that is leading up into the gold silk material that's part of the shirt. I said, I think that Jimmy will wear this in contemporary times, right? And I wanted to have that color palette of that like teal that's there. And then a lot of the times it's just like playing off of like colors, playing off of words, and again, it comes back to like the lyrics, right? So there's just so much there, just in that bottom corner alone, that as you can see, I talked about it all day. But we ain't got that time.
No, we don't got all day. It is the evening. I don't know if because I think you made a statement. I don't know if there was a question or if that was the
my question.
She goes, how did I come up with the Easter eggs? And then I went on a tangent. Yeah, that's how we got here. It's my fault. It's not Karen's.
I mean, I would even add to that question because I'm fascinated by this one. There are so many things in that painting. How did you come to that? It's such a personal.
Which one?
As opposed,
the one in the corner or
the
back
one
to the drawing
about
board?
when you die, when you're 100 and you're bored.
Yeah.
I love that one.
So that one, again, I love puns. I'm a dad. I love dad jokes. I love it. But again, so I have this. I have these, again, notes in my phone, and I just had this vision of somebody sitting on a sketch pad anchored over a pool and with their back turned. And so I had that maybe for like 7 years or so, just sitting in my phone. And then something, I forgot what it was, the catalyst, but I just wanted to get into it. The canvas was naturally like warped that way. So I said, oh, I think this is it. And so then I started to have like an intersection, or I said, well, what if I have the caution tape coming over? But then I said, you know what? So, you know, as a Black man, like I can feel like my back's up against the wall in certain ways, but you got to face your fears. You got to step out on faith, right? And so that was the start of it, right? So the genesis was going to be one person. But then I was thinking about my wife to a degree, right? And some struggles that she made, and just females in general, right? And so I said that I wanted to like kind of expand, right? How can I not like centralize, right? And have a concentrated voice, but then I also wanted to have him not be alone, right? And even sometimes when you're together or when you're in a group of people, you can still feel alone, right? Because everybody has their different thoughts. So up there in so I started going on a binge of like reading. So there's a lot of like self-help books. I study finance. So you have like terms like GIGO, like garbage in, garbage out. And that's also my process, right? So whatever we feed our bodies and our minds, that's what we're processing. That's what the output's gonna be, right? And so I wanted, again, it was me tapping into my intentionality. And so up there in the clouds are the intentions and the fear, right? The condensation, that pressure building up. So, you know, there's a saying that you miss 1,000% or 100% of the shots that you don't take. So that's where there's bricks intermingled within the clouds, right? But you have to go for it. So there's this balance that's also alluded to in HIT, and here is Inconvenient Truths. That's why it's Eschner Crown, courage and curiosity, right? I'm largely an introvert, you know, no matter how much like I'm talking right here and I'm in a room full of people, but it's because it's the greater purpose is that what tips me over the edge to do what I do. And to, like, it's hard to come out, right? If I could, in a perfect world, in a perfect space, I'd rather sit and paint all day, every day. Folks that know me, they can attest to this, right? I won't leave a room, right? And I love it. But that's me challenging myself to say, well, how are you going to better not only yourself, but others if you don't step out on faith and take that leap, right? And so that's why you have like the butterflies and the stomach, right? That are in the gentleman's tummy, but then they're flying out and they start turning into dollar bills and stuff, right? Because in order to venture out and to do something for yourself and to capitalize, right? And we live in a capitalistic society, you gotta be able to eat in some form or fashion. So that's how it's tied in together and it's looped around. And then if you notice, I'm nudging towards like Jean-Michel Basquiat, right? So there's same old that's by the poolside, right? I gotta, you know, give a nod to it. And it's the same thing that's over there in the corner on Train of Thought, right? So there's the crown that's up there, and then there's the red road that's there. And it's like a blood red road. And one of the key points in that piece is there's a tent that's there that says, it says Iran, Iraq, right? And so it's a triple entendre for like, you know, talking about war, right? But also like running from something, also a country. And then Iraq is crossed out. It's not a Q, there's a Q at the end, but there's an X also for CK, right? Iraq, I stack money, I go, it's capitalism, it's taking this. And so those are the other Easter eggs that are in there when you really peel back those layers. I'm adding in there, and he's got the chip on his shoulder that's coming. So certain things are literal, and then they spill into like other things that are more hidden, not only for my sake, but also for others and for interpretation.
So one of the things that Versatile always says is like, you know, the pleasure of being able to work in the space, right, is that we can come and we can enjoy the art. But she was saying the other day that just like most people look at a painting for, you know, let's say like a couple minutes, right? You know, a couple seconds to a couple minutes. It's just about all of these, like every time you go back to it, there's something else you're finding. And it's like the Easter eggs, right? But also thinking about, well, what's the story, right? And so thinking about like, what are the things that we're not seeing because we're not looking deep enough?
Yeah. Or sometimes shallow enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Or that.
So one of my favorite lines from Andre 3000, I think he wore it on the shirt, you know, Andre 3000 from Outkast, he goes, when him and Big Boy came back out on tour, they said, you know, I think deeply about shallow things. Perfect, you know. Sometimes my wife, you know, what should I wear? You know, does this look right? Oh, you know, it's because my mom, she has this story about when I was younger, she would come out with her outfits for work, and I'm like, that doesn't match. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you got that eye. And say, hey, you know, combine like, you know, this and stuff, right? It was just something that was innate in a certain way, right? But you build on it. And so, you know, when it comes to you know, different levels of thought. And that's why I have like in back to the drawing board, I have boredom and complacency on there. And I purposefully misspelled boredom, right? Because I have dumb as spelled as D-U-M-B, right? So one of my pet peeves, oh, you guys are gonna hate me for this.
Uh-oh.
So one of my pet peeves is when people say, you got 7 minutes? When people say that they're bored, right? I'm like, how can you be bored? There's so much to do in life. I was like, I'm constantly stimulated and constantly like writing things out and doing so. You can't, that's impossible. So there's so much to do. And especially in this age, I said, so if you're not, usually, so this might be harsh, but if you're not like progressing in something, it doesn't have to be leaps and bounds, but the 1%, right? Every day. And especially, and again, back to the drawing board, talks about this, there's 2 pennies that are in it. So it goes to same coins. Save your 2 cents. And that's why the 2 cents are over there by the hazard symbol over there, right? If you ain't gonna do the work, either put up or shut up, right? So some people, especially in like, if you're not in certain like leadership positions or you're not in a certain way, you know, you're gonna understand what's prioritized there and like help contribute to the work. It's cool. You should always be critically thinking, but it's easy to say it on the sidelines, right? Right, Dr. Mathis. Easy to say it on the sideline, but it's hard when you actually got to roll up your sleeves to do it, and that's what everybody in this room stands for. It's like, yeah, nah, I'm gonna get my hands dirty. I'm gonna dive in. I'm gonna do it, no matter what level I'm at. If I'm the CEO, if I'm not, I'm still gonna clean the toilets. I'm still gonna do this. I'm still gonna make sure that it looks this way, right? You know? So.
Yeah, I'm curious. Who inspired you? You seem to be someone very curious, and it's not just the art, but curious. Obviously, you talked about you know, hip hop, but you talked about people in history. Some mentioned some obscure people that people may not know. I'm just curious across various genres or other areas. Who inspired you to share your art and share your gift?
Yeah, great question. So I was blessed. I used to bug my mom all the time about like drawing comic book figures and stuff. And she's like, I can only take you but so far. Like you pretty much, you got it. Like, I don't know what to do with this. So she introduced me to a watercolor specialist that I studied for maybe about 9 months to a year or something like that. She was a laid off instructor. And so she introduced me to like Winslow Homer, Georgia O'Keeffe, who are a lot of my favorite artists to this day. So part of my other parts of my portfolio is like flowers and like large flowers and things like that, right? Abstract work here and there. But then I met, as Erika was mentioning, Donald Blanton that my dad introduced me to, right? Met a man that's mutual and he was working there and he took me under his wing. So not only did he inspire me from a technical standpoint, and just as a creator of art, right, and that craftsmanship, but also as a businessman, right, and that if I put my mind to it, I can go and I can create the world that's around me for how I see fit, right. So I was kind of a reluctant artist to a degree because I would tell my parents and stuff like, yo, you got a gift and everything, but I don't want to just be known and pigeonholed for just that. And you can do so much with art. So I don't want to, you know, and say art is everywhere. Imagery is everywhere and it's so needed. It's underappreciated to a lot of to a lot of the extent, but there's so much that you could do with it, right? If you engineer it correctly. But I'm infatuated by business, the human mind, right? You know, even like artificial intelligence, you know, I get really curious about, you know, there's again, right? When we talk about like blockchain, like there's just so much that that kind of overlaps and synthesizes together. And I think that's the excitement in it. And then I asked myself, okay, cool. Well, how can like art be a conduit for that or a branch of that, right? And so despite my curiosity in these different media or subject matters, I think a lot of the times it comes down to the core of like, okay, what did God bestow me with? Will I neglect this or how can I merge it together?
You buy the comic book though, if you do write the comic book.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that vote of confidence. Yeah.
Are there any other questions either in the space or on the Zoom call? We're here until 7:30, but any other like burning questions that folks want to ask right now?
Yes.
Are all those your little notes? Like, is that all your handwriting or is
Yeah.
that things that you've collected? Because if they're different, I'm just wondering how long you kept those notes?
Yeah. So to the urgency question, right? So I was on, so I listened to a lot of audio books, like routinely, and then, you know, and then I read a lot, right? Articles, you know, it range podcasts, I'm a huge, so within there are a lot of quotes that I gathered, right? And then as it stretched back there, so that one's more like personal, one. So there's not a lot of my personal notes in there. There are some in the one that's next to it though, in the Tupac one, right? And so, but in Back to the Drawing Board, you have, you know, lines from like Robert F. Smith, you know, the billionaire, you have an investor, you have lines from like Jay-Z, right? You have lines like, you know, the richest place in the world is a cemetery, and that's purposely towards the back part of there. So like the pool is dissected so that the further you get back, that's like your lifeline, right? So it's more urgent up front, and then as you get back, it's like what happens when you waste your life, or like what happens when you let ideas die, right? And that's one of my greatest fears, right? One of my greatest fears used to be, you know, if I somehow like have like really deep rheumatoid arthritis or something like that. Yeah, so between that and then like my eyesight, right? But when I really think about it, it's like the thought, right? The thought process. Will I be able to convey and get things out the way that I want them to? And sometimes you just got to do it, right? Hence why even like the shoes on their feet, you got New Balance for the gentleman, and then you got Nike, right? Just do it, right? So it's like, how am I going to find where I'm at, what my equilibrium is, and then when do I just dive in, right? So you got acronyms on there for like fear, you know, and you got like action is the cure to fear, right? My man up there, the caterpillar on the hang glider, it says, you know, fly, yeah, be fly ink, right? So my thought process, I'm sick, y'all. So my thought process is like, what happens when you're in a rush, right? That caterpillar didn't have time to wait and go into, you know, that part of the metamorphosis. It used ingenuity to build something and to head out there. And he happens to be carrying the plug because he's the plug, so he's carrying the connector, right? Yeah, he's the source of his own ideas, right? Yeah, so those are the fun, and often I laugh.
Really
I laugh while I'm doing these things, right? That's the fun that I have.
So I wanna be mindful of time. We're at 7 o'clock. We're here in the space until 7:30, but we don't have to be formal at this point. So I appreciate you all for coming out. I just want to set a reminder: the QR code for the silent auction is on the screen. The prints that are being auctioned off are near the bookshelves to the left when you walk out. So take a look at those. All of the art here, except for Badu and Baldwin and Harriet's Inconvenient Truths, are for sale. So partake in the snacks, the drinks, the company for the next half an hour. But we really appreciate you all for coming out. We appreciate you all for being curious and courageous and joining us in the conversation. Anything you want to say before we
Yeah.
close out?
I just want to say it's honored. This has been a great crowd. But for those that are joining online, it's been wonderful. So many special people in this room that are near and dear to me. Folks that I just met or so that decided to take the time out of their schedule to come on out. I don't take it for granted. I know your time is precious. Trust me, I talk about intentionality. I know that every minute counts, right? So for you to spend that time with me today and Erika, and the work and the figures in this room, it doesn't go unnoticed, and I'm truly grateful for it. Bless you. One thing that I do want to allude to, for anyone who is bidding on any artwork, again, I think that's our way of coming up with a cool way of, contributing to the arts, keeping the arts alive, right? Contributing to the center, right, is very special here. The people that work here, the very ground that we're standing on and sitting on, it's history, right? And that's another aspect that I don't take for granted. So, any dollar counts. Just being here again and having your attention. We know that we live in the age of social media and attention is stretched all over the place. So for you just to pay attention to me yap and go on about what's going on in this room and elsewhere, truly appreciate it. And thank you so very much for taking the time tonight.